Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Historians of the Movies podcast, where every week we're talking about movies and the history behind them. I am not your normal host and creator, Jason Herbert. I am John Wyatt Greenlee. It's a surprise deal historian, and this is the second time I'm hosting this podcast. I am back today to talk about the iconic 1987 film, The Princess Bride. Joining me to talk about the movie are two friends of mine, Jillian Forsberg and Elizabeth R. Andersen. Jillian and Elizabeth are both historical fiction writers, and we have a great conversation over the course of discussing the film about the role of historical fiction writing and its importance in connecting people to the past. It's a lovely conversation. It's really fascinating. I had a great time with it, and I hope you all enjoyed listening to it. So, if you like fencing and fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles, then really at this point, all you need to do is sit back, relax, and listen, because Historians at the Movies is coming up next. Right, so here we are, Historians at the Movies, with not one, but two really interesting people to talk to about a great movie. Here with Elizabeth R. Andersen and Jillian Forsberg, and we are going to talk today about The Princess Bride, which is just one of my favorite movies of all time. So I'm delighted to be here. And I guess welcome to the both of you. And I guess to get started, you want to sort of introduce yourselves and say a little something, and then we'll hop right on in.
Sure. I'm Jillian Forsberg. I am a historical fiction author and I own a bridal store. So this is definitely apropos for me to do history and a bride at the same time. I write mostly 18th century fiction, but my history background goes back farther than that. I live in Wichita, Kansas, and I've actually known Jason Herbert since 2010. We went to grad school together. So Historians of the Movies is very part of my background noise, like every single week. I always have it playing. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here.
Well, welcome.
I am Elizabeth R. Andersen. Haven't met Jason, but John Wyatt has actually drawn the maps for some of my books. I do write historical fiction, and I focus mostly on the Middle Ages, so 13th and 14th century. I have two series that are based around those times, and John Wyatt is my map maker. And so I'm extremely happy to be here because The Princess Bride is, the best movie that's ever been made. So this is going to be fun.
I can get on board with that. So, but Elizabeth, you have a book, like a new book launching today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This very day. And this is May 18th. When we're recording this. So by the time, I don't know when this is going to play, like when it's going to drop for other people to listen to, but they should know that starting sometime in the past, May 18th, they could get your book.
Yeah.
So what's your new book?
Okay. So this book is part of a series. I have two series. The series is called The Alewives of Colmar Mysteries. It is set in 14th century Colmar, which is in present-day France. It's in a region called Alsace, which is sort of on the border of France and Germany. And it is about three very unlikely friends who decide to brew ale to make some money. They're women. They become alewives, not the fish. It was a profession. And they have to solve a few mysteries along the way. There's some crime that happens in their town, and no one else will pay attention to what's going on. So they are not princesses. They are not nobles. They are very much poor nobodies. And the crimes happen to other poor nobodies. So it is a little bit different than I think a lot of your medieval stories, where you get a lot more focus on nobility or people who are famous already. These just are sort of uncouth, very a little bit wacky women. And so book 3 is out. They can be read in any order. They're rather short. I like to call them cozy medieval mysteries. And this one is called The Monstrous Murders. It's book 3.
Congratulations on it. It's sort of being thrown into the world today.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's been a busy morning.
I bet. And Jillian, you've got another book coming out this fall, don't you?
I do, yes. My first book came out October of 24. It's called The Rhino Keeper. It's the story of Clara, the Indian rhino, who was the first animal celebrity, and how she traveled for 18 years with her Dutch ship captain, caregiver. And she was an incredible animal. And while I was researching that story, I came across another obscure history of this porcelain maker who decided that he was going to try his best to make porcelain in the Chinese way, which in the 18th century was not possible yet. They didn't know the formulas. And a king heard about this and basically kidnapped him and chained him to the floor until he could make him a life-size porcelain menagerie. So my second book is a companion. I know, my second book is a companion to The Rhino Keeper. Clara the Rhino makes a cameo, and it is coming out in October. So I'm excited about it. And actually next week I get to go to Meissen, Germany and tour the porcelain factory that this person actually worked and lived in. So
that's really cool. There's like just a built-in joke there about like a rhino in a porcelain shop, right?
Exactly. There really is. And, if you try and make porcelain that large, it just explodes.
Yeah.
So things really didn't go well for these people. No, and they had no idea, So it's just like toxic fumes and medieval crazy castles. There's a castle that was built in the 10th century that is where they make all this porcelain in the basement. And they don't know what they're doing. And there's like chemicals and all kinds of crazy fires. And yeah. So probably not the best idea unless you actually know what you're doing. But they certainly didn't. And it was very entertaining for me to do this research because the king in this book had rumored, I don't know what you can say, 300 bastard children, locked his wife in a tower when she didn't want to convert to Catholicism. And, he just did some really unsavory things, but he made Dresden very pretty. So there's balance.
Yeah.
Has this make an appearance in The Rhino Keeper? I feel like I remember
Yes.
this. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, there's a chapter, an entire chapter about the porcelain maker and the king and the Rhino Keeper. And that's where I feel like I'm Hermione and I've stumbled upon a rare bit of magic and boom, shoot, there's a second book I have to write now. So yeah. And Elizabeth didn't mention that her books are hilarious.
No, it's true. It's really true.
So funny. You don't often read those kinds of historical fiction books where you're like, oh, what? Wait a minute, this is hilarious. Which I feel like ties in so well to The Princess Bride because it's the same kind of humor where you're like, wait, is this supposed to be a comedy right now? Like I thought all things set in the past were super serious. Nope. And then all of a sudden you're rhyming with the word peanut and her characters are just doing all kinds of crazy stuff and they have like 13 children and they don't like any of them. And the whole thing is just her series is so funny.
Medieval people have great humor. They really do. They loved, their humor was raunchy and gross. They have a great sense of humor back then.
They did. As a very serious historian myself, of course, I cannot sort of admit to that. But no, it's very true. So I want to come back to how you sort of do research and write, the both of you, because it was one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to y'all in the context of this movie. But I think we've probably gone for long enough without actually talking much about the movie. So let's we're talking today about the Princess Bride, and I think I'm just going to throw out there because I think Jillian got us started in a pretty good direction. Like, what do you love about this movie? That's a really easy question because it's like everything. But what do y'all love about the movie?
It is everything. It is a romance. It is an action movie. It is it's got mystery. It's got magic. It is absolutely everything. And I think the thing that's so wonderful about it and the reason why it has so much staying power is because it is a movie that you can watch with your family and everyone is going to love it. It's not a kid's movie. It's not an adult's movie. The adults are laughing, the kids are laughing. And so it's something that can be it's more of a community movie, right? Everyone can watch this movie and enjoy it. Whereas there aren't a lot of films out there that have staying power that are still like that, where you feel like all generations can enjoy. And it's just going to be long lasting. It's not going to date itself. Obviously it was made in the 80s and we see that in the beginning with Fred Savage, but it's still wonderful. Yeah.
I think for me, it's a pacing thing. There's a lot of movies that are made around the same time where if I tried to get my 9-year-old to watch it right now, she'd be like, Mom, this is really boring. but there's no boring moments in this movie. Like, it just keeps going, and the quips keep coming, and the action keeps coming. And just when she's about to turn away from the screen, there's another horse scene. Like, hello, there's all of these romantic pieces of beautiful cinematography with Buttercup and all the landscapes and the castle that they really filmed in a medieval castle.
Mhm.
And they were able to use all of the props that were there, so they didn't even have to really decorate that much, which I'm sure was great for the budget. But I think for me, it's like, what, and that's what we call it in historical fiction, is we call it pacing. Like, does something happen every chapter that's actually going to keep your reader hooked? And for The Princess Bride, it's like, does something happen every scene where you're going to keep watching? Like, did a person in a rat suit just crawl out of a swamp? Did her dress just accidentally catch on fire? And, it's just all of these funny things, but at the same time, they're not campy or inappropriate. So I think Elizabeth is right. The staying power of this is that the humor is classic and it's a lifelong movie, but it's also that there's so much unexpected things that happen. Like, who knew that there was going to be the best sword fighting scene of all time thrown in there with two people who'd never fought with swords before this movie happened? So for me, it's like all of these tiny little things that just keep it moving forward. It's brilliant. And I love that no matter how many times you've watched it, especially if you've watched it as a kid and then you watch it 10 years later and then you watch it 10 years later, you catch little nuances that you totally missed before. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, I think you have a really good point because about trying to watch it with a younger child these days and pacing. An example of this is my favorite movie of all time is The Goonies. I tried to watch that with my son when he was about the same age as your daughter, about 9 years old, and I was sitting there thinking, this is really slow. Like I never remembered, I forgot how long it took for the action to start in that movie. There's a lot of just setup with these characters. And my son got bored and wandered off. And I'm thinking, how could you possibly wander off in The Goonies? But the way that stories are told these days, we have this sort of Netflix mentality. And so the audience really expects the action to start immediately. And it's a different way of storytelling than I think what we used to do up until 20 or 30 years ago. And I'm definitely not trying to get into a kids these days sort of discussion, but you're totally right. The pacing of The Princess Bride does not leave you time to get bored, but it also isn't relentless. So it's not exhausting. It is in a lot of ways a very gentle movie, especially when you think about film that we watch now. Like it's action packed, but it's not exhausting.
That's a really interesting point. The both of y'all, and I hadn't really thought about it, but. And also without trying to talk about the sort of how terrible kids are these days. Like I have a 14-year-old and almost 11-year-old to be 11 in like 2 weeks. And like, they sometimes think that YouTube videos are just like too slow because they really like the YouTube shorts, man. Mm-hmm. And it's like, whew.
Yeah.
I watched this with them last night, the both of them, and they both loved it, and they fell out laughing a bunch of times, which was actually really. I enjoyed that because the last time I watched this movie with them was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and they enjoyed it, but like they also were like didn't see exactly what was so great about it. They're like, that's fine, but they really loved it last night. And my 11-year-old this morning over breakfast was trying to remember how the scene with the poison scene with Vicini and Wesley goes. So he was trying to recite it and like, oh, there, see, you've fallen into the trap of learning all of the lines so you can recite the entire thing by heart, like my whole generation.
Yes. Is this the most quotable movie of all time?
Yeah, it is.
Because
it has to be.
It has to be. When I was rewatching it, I was like, "Oh, marriage. Oh, does anybody want a peanut?" Like there's inconceivable. Like there's just so many tiny little blips of quotes that you can pull from this. And I was really trying to think like, what other movie is this quotable? I truly don't know. It's so hard to think of anything because there's usually like one quote from each movie, right? But this one, I think there's like 10 or 15.
Oh, I know people who can fully quote the whole thing.
At least.
Yeah, at least. But we also have to tie that back to the book because a lot of this came straight from the Princess Bride book. And I think that that's really important for people to realize that this was a novel that was turned into a movie. So the source material was more, obviously you have more density there, but that source material allows for the director to have more, to pull from characterization that you don't get in just a screenplay, because you don't get all the backstory, you don't get all the detail. So I think that's definitely part of the humor that was woven through this, was that the book was funny as well.
Well, the book was written by a screenplay writer, so he was
there you go.
already
That
understood
helps,
how to set things up in the book for it to be made into a screenplay.
And he also wrote this, he wrote the screenplay for the movie too. Yeah. So there's it's all kind of one thing, which explains. I mean, it's awfully true to the text of the book too. The movie, there's some places where it sort of departs, but it's as far as movie adaptations of books goes, it's really close to the book. I can't think of another movie that's this quotable, because you can pick just about any line from it,
and multiple characters. It's not just one. Mm-hmm. Which I think is it's so fascinating too, to think about that, because you have all these minor characters in this,
like the gate key guy.
Even
that's quotable. Oh, you mean this gate key?
Yeah, exactly. They just overwhelm, but they don't steal. You have Billy Crystal dressed up as a crazy old man, and then Andre the Giant. What an iconic moment for him to be able to not be a scary wrestler to people, and especially to kids, but the way that he caught Princess Buttercup in this movie, and that tenderness when they slowed that exact moment down,
they looked at each other and smiled.
Yes, you could see that Andre the Giant was just a completely wonderful human in several moments in this, where he was so kind and so nice, even though he's supposed to be this big lug. And I love that juxtaposition in character, where you have someone who's physically imposing, but then they're written in such a way that you see their heart. And from what I understand in reading about Andre the Giant, that's exactly how he was as a person too. It was a literal gentle giant. But think about all those minor characters. First of all, they couldn't have casted any better than they did. And second of all, the people that they cast were fully in, and you could tell that they loved every second of this.
A lot of them were new actors, or not new actors, but less known. They weren't Robin Wright. I think she was an unknown, and Carrie Ellis.
She'd been on soap operas before.
It says that in the credits, introducing Robin Wright.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think she was super young. I don't even know if she was in her 20s yet.
God, she was so hot. I was watching it last night. Yeah. I was like, this woman is so beautiful. Damn.
When she's walking out during her nightmare, where the crazy old hag is saying boo to her, first of all, that wedding dress is exquisite.
I was going to ask you about the dresses in here, Jillian.
Oh my God. I paused. I said, hang on, no one talk in my house right now. I'm going to get really close to the screen and just, physically zoom in. I said,
I'm going to ask you about that. I have a dress question for you. Wait, go finish, but I have a dress question.
Yeah, I was like, is this better than Sarah's dress on the labyrinth in the ball scene?
Yeah, totally. Sarah's dress was no.
I don't know. That dress has an emotional hold on me.
Too much sleeves, too many sleeves.
It's so funny because they put so much work into a wedding dress that was literally in her dream. It wasn't even the real wedding dress that she ended up wearing. But no, the tailoring on those things were exquisite. And if you think about it, the silhouette became iconic. And when you think Princess Buttercup or you think Princess Bride, also think about this. The title of this movie is actually kind of strange.
It is.
Totally Buttercup is really not the most dynamic character in this. But if it would have been called the Dread Pirate Roberts, what would we have thought of this movie? It would have been entirely different. So the Princess Bride also for me is strange, because she was not a princess until she was going to get married.
That was
so
I don't know. The question is how does that work?
Yeah,
I thought you were supposed to marry first to be a princess.
Yes, exactly. So all of these dresses that she wore throughout became iconic for the Princess Bride, and it really skyrocketed Robin Wright into this unbelievable career, where we all see her not just as a show-stopping beauty on the screen, but also as someone who is multifaceted in what she can do, because her relationship with Westley right up front, you didn't see someone who was just this woman who's going to, give up whatever for this guy. She's also as he says, as you wish. And she's got this attitude about her, this very cold attitude, but then you see her heart. So her character arc, absolutely beautiful and brilliantly done. I love her performance in this.
I asked y'all what your favorite parts of the movie were, and I think for me it was the casting, actually. And this is, as you were saying, everybody in this movie is outstanding. There aren't, even the small parts aren't small. There's nobody who wanders through this film that says a word that doesn't matter, and they're all just amazing at it.
Can you imagine being an extra on that set?
I was reading yesterday about some of the other casting possibilities that they had, because they were Robin Wright was new, but and some of the people who read for that role were Courtney Cox read for it, and so did Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg?
Which would have been really
That would have
a
been
very different movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been entirely different.
I remember reading about Wallace Shaw and how he was cast as a secondary choice to Danny DeVito. And there's a lot said about how nervous he was for that role. He really felt like he wasn't the right person for the role when he found out that he wasn't their first choice and that Danny DeVito was their first choice. He was a nervous wreck. And he really felt the whole time that he wasn't doing things correctly. And I think I want to say it was Carrie who was encouraging him and like, you are perfect for this role. That's why you're here. And can you imagine, like, Danny DeVito is Danny DeVito. He would have brought, a lot of humor to it, but it's like, it is absolutely perfectly cast. Even the people who thought they weren't perfect for that role were so perfect. And it seems like, from what I know of this movie, they were all very encouraging to each other. And it was very much big, happy family on that set. And same with Andre the Giant. He barely spoke English. He had to listen to his lines on headphones when he wasn't doing his scenes. Rob Reiner recorded his lines for him because he had trouble with pronouncing the words. And so, he's not an actor and he didn't necessarily think he was right for the role either, but he was perfect. So
he was perfect.
Yeah. And so it's really sweet because I feel like you see that come through the movie. You see that friendship and affection come through the characters, even the ones that are supposed to be antagonistic towards each other. You can just tell they're having fun. Somehow you can tell they're having fun, but it doesn't pull you out of the movie and, think like these guys are supposed to be fighting with each other, but clearly they are enjoying this. They're loving it.
Yeah.
One of the funny things I know about Andre the Giant is that he had just had right before the filming, he'd had back surgery.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so he, despite being like the strong guy in the film, right? Like he was probably like one of the weakest people on the set at that point. Like he couldn't carry anybody. Like the fight scene where, he's got Wesley on his back is shot really close. So you can't see that Cary Elwes is basically standing on a stepladder.
Yeah.
And the scene you mentioned, Jillian, at the end where he catches Buttercup, and holds her for a second. She's suspended by wire, so he's not actually taking any of the weight at all there because he couldn't do it. But yeah, I think you mentioned that there's the real sense of him as a really caring person, and I know that he felt that on set with the people he was filming with, and it's something he really enjoyed about it because he, like Fezzik in the book, he goes through a lot of his life like being seen as kind of grotesque in some ways.
I remember I watched a little behind the scenes about this, and Andre the Giant said that this was the only set and workplace that he'd been on that nobody really looked at him twice.
Yeah.
They all just fully accepted him for who he was and enjoyed being around him without much fear being shown. And if you look up the stats of Andre the Giant and you really look on screen, like his hand is probably twice the size of Buttercup's head.
Yeah.
And that is not that's not CGI. Like that is literally just how big he was and how small she was. I just think it's fascinating all the things they were able to do to not only keep him safe, but that they would go through that and do that. Like they could have cast anybody else who was over 7 foot for this role, but they knew that Andre the Giant was so perfect that they were willing to work with his limitations in order to do that. And what resulted in it is, I think his fame skyrocketed, and he has become like, if The Princess Bride did not exist, would we know Andre the Giant as we know him?
I didn't know he was a wrestler.
Would it be sequestered into the wrestling world?
Nope. I would not know who he was if it wasn't for The Princess Bride. The wrestling world is small. So this, I think, it was a surprise. I found out years later that he was a wrestler. Years later, I don't actually remember the first time I saw The Princess Bride because I grew up in the 90s. And so all of us just had it like as a part of our childhood and don't know when we saw it. But like, I didn't know that he was a wrestler, and I would never have known that if it wasn't for The Princess Bride.
Is the most famous person on this cast Billy Crystal at that time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably.
So they didn't even really have any star power to pull in viewers, which is interesting because they could have.
I think Rob Reiner was actually one of the most famous people. He was really making his way as a director because he had just done This Is Spinal Tap.
This Is Spinal Tap,
yeah.
So I think that he might have been one of the big draws for an audience, but then also, yes, Billy Crystal, absolutely.
So this was a box office failure, and it wasn't super popular till it came to VHS. And I wonder, like we're talking about the casting, if they would have cast someone super famous as either Buttercup or Wesley, would this have done better in the box office? But would it have been as iconic as it is? And that's like, obviously we can't answer that question, but that's just something I think about with this. I would have loved to see this in theaters.
Well, okay, so actually I have a question for you all. Have you ever seen, speaking of super famous people in this movie, have you seen the remake that was done during COVID?
No.
Okay.
No. What?
This is, okay, I think we can all agree The Princess Bride is perfect and it should never be remade, right?
Don't touch
Right.
it.
Well,
Yeah.
during COVID, during lockdown, we had a whole bunch of bored, sequestered actors who weren't allowed to leave their homes. So they decided to make a remake of The Princess Bride as a benefit to World Central Kitchen. I remember seeing this during lockdown. They each took a certain section of lines and they would record their lines in their own home, sometimes with the assistance of like a loved one or a friend or something like that. Their own props. They would do it in their backyards. And it has every single actor you've ever seen. Like every famous actor you've ever seen is in this. And they're the scenes that required, like the scenes where the boats are in the water and they're sort of chasing each other. They did all that with Legos. So like, they have Rob Reiner makes an appearance as the grandfather. Fred Savage comes back to reprise his role as the little kid, and he's sitting in his bed, and his own kid like hands him a copy of this book that has a paper taped over the front that says The Princess Bride. It's completely handmade. It is delightful. It's like an hour long, and you just sit there watching this, and you're like, these are these actors filming this in their backyard. They're using garden hoses as a rope to pull Wesley up who, by the way, is played by Black Jack, laying on his stomach on the stairs in his backyard, grabbing a hose and trying to climb up the cliffs of insanity. It's wonderful. So go check that out.
So what I want to see is like Robin or Carrie responding to this.
Carrie's
like
in
I
it.
want to see them watching.
They're both in it. Yeah. Harry doesn't even play Wesley. He plays Count Rugen or Prince Humperdinck. I can't remember.
Of course he does.
Yeah.
He wouldn't want to reprise something that he perfected years ago. You can't ask like an actor to do that again.
I don't know how they got all. They have Cranston. They've got Javier Bardem. Everyone. Diego Luna plays Inigo Montoya. Like.
Oh, that's nice.
I don't know if they have like one email address that just sends something out to all the actors in Hollywood. I don't know how they got everyone.
They probably all share an agent, honestly, and that's how they were able to do this because the agents were bored too.
It's fabulous. It's the only remake that should ever exist. It's Legos.
Okay, but who played the Swamp Rat? That's what I want to know.
Oh, you know what? I actually don't remember. I was watching the first part of it this morning because I had just remembered it. So I need to go back through it and see. I'll send you guys a link. It's delightful.
Please do. Actually, we should post that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
People are going to want to watch that. And I think, honestly, if you're going to do it, you need to do a marathon of The Princess Bride, and then you need to watch The Princess Bride behind the scenes doc, and then you need to watch the COVID Princess Bride.
Yep.
That's how that should go. In that exact order.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So going back and rewatching this for the podcast here, was there anything that stood out to you that you hadn't sort of noticed before? Or like, I mean, you mentioned, Elizabeth, that you sort of catch different things at different times when you see it. So I'm curious if there's anything that stood out this time around.
I can't stand the soundtrack. That's what I noticed. I was like, I forgot that I really don't like this. It's
80s. What can you do? Like, like
a
lot of this.
It's like one synthesis, like just horrible.
Girl, they had a budget.
It's the guy from Dire Straits too. It's the guy from Dire Straits who wrote it.
I know. Oh my God. I know. I don't know.
You know what though? The 80s music in anything, it's going to immediately just be jarring to our ears because they were experimenting with synth, and now we've perfected it. Okay, we got to give them some grace because they didn't know what the heck they were doing. But I agree with you. The soundtrack was pretty bad. For me, it was actually that Buttercup's dress really did catch on fire in the swamp. And as someone who works with garments all the time, I will tell you that is polyester. and that they're very lucky that Carrie ad-libbed and tried to get it out because it literally would have just whoosh. There's another movie scene. Yeah, she could have gotten really hurt and she didn't. There's another movie where a dress catches on fire behind the scenes, and that was recent. So in the Cinderella movie that Disney did a few years ago, the live action Cinderella, there's a beautiful wedding dress at the end of that movie, and it's like hand painted, and she goes out on a balcony and she greets all the people. And a lot of the movie critics in the fashion world were like, well, why do we only see that dress one time? And it's actually because that dress she was near a space heater and that dress ignited.
Oh God.
So that is toast. So that's the only scene that they actually were able to record of that dress, which is crazy. So, and I was watching Princess Buttercup as she was going through the fire swamp to see if the dress was still like singed in certain scenes. And it is in some and it isn't in others. And it's just editing and, they don't want to have to make another dress, et cetera, et cetera. But that was the first scene that they filmed.
I know.
So that's the first scene that they filmed. They had the real people in rat suits, which was one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen in my life now that I've seen it as an adult. I'm like, that's obviously a full-grown human in the air, crawling across the floor. But then I was doing more research on this movie, and I found out that one of the rat guys who could crawl like that the fastest had gotten pulled over and was arrested. And before they started filming on the first day, they had to go bail one of the rat guys in the swamp.
There's something sort of fitting about that, though.
Yeah, why didn't they just put another dude in the rat suit? And the answer is because no one could crawl as fast as that guy. Okay, they were dedicated to this task.
That's a funny story on his end, too, because it's like, well, why did you get bailed out of jail? It's like, I can crawl faster than anybody, and they needed that.
Can you imagine how nasty and hot that little rat suit must have been?
They were so gross. It's perfect, 80s prosthetic gross, right? In the 80s, it just really liked gross things. And so it was perfectly disgusting rat.
Exactly. Once again, labyrinth, weird Jim Henson stuff. And they did not have Jim Henson money to make a real swamp rat. So they had to actually, by the way, is that where the term swamp rat comes from? I don't know. Maybe.
That's a fun question. I don't know either.
Someone needs to comment and tell us. It probably isn't, but I'd like to think that The Princess Bride is the reason that we use the term swamp.
So the one thing that really, that kind of struck me as interesting watching through it that I'd never really thought about before was, it was the way that Inigo's story ends and he, defeats Count Rugen. It's really fascinating when I sort of stop and think of it because he spends his dad's killed when he's 10 and then he sets off on this 20-year quest for revenge, right? Where he becomes the greatest swordsman in the world, essentially. And all in preparation for taking revenge for his father's death. And he finally gets to Rugen and he doesn't actually need the skills that he's learned over the last 20 years. That's not a big sword fight. And Rugen's not he's a dude who wanted to buy a fancy sword, but he's not a master by any stretch of the imagination. Inigo sort of manages his victory by through his capacity to deal with pain, right? Mm-hmm. Because he gets the knife thrown in him and he gets stabbed and he's able to sort of overcome that and deal with that, maybe because he's dealt with the pain of his father and he's being motivated by all of this. But it's interesting. That's fascinating because dealing with pain is Rugen's whole thing, right? That's his motivate. Really interested by how people deal with pain and manage pain and even built a machine for it. And so it was really interesting to me that that's the tool that Inigo actually uses to take revenge on his father is that, so I thought maybe that Count Rugen would appreciate that in his final moments, this sort of last lesson about how you manage pain.
And instead of facing him, he just runs. And I think that moment too, when I watched it as an adult again, where he finally is, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And Count Rugen's oh shit, and just sprints. Everyone in that watched it at my house, and I'm sure in the movie theater was we've been waiting for that. Yeah. He ran. That was it's so iconic, but it's also so funny. But it's also, if you think about it, so disappointing for Inigo to have that happen. He was been preparing for this his entire life.
He's been playing that scene over and over and over again in his head.
How many times has he said it?
At the end, when Inigo is injured and he's got that dagger in his stomach, Count Rugen's just sitting there watching him suffer and be in pain.
Yep.
And he says, "I think this is the worst thing I've ever seen. How wonderful!" Like he's such a sadist, right? And so it is really interesting also that before Inigo killed him, he inflicted the same pain back. He gave him the scars. He gave him the stabs in the arms. And then I don't know if you guys are aware, maybe you are, but for Mandy Patinkin, this was a really significant role because of his father's death by cancer. And so when he said his final line to Count Rugen, it was him feeling like he was talking to the cancer that had killed his father. So he really had a very personal connection to that role. And my mother just survived cancer. And I, thinking about dealing with that, with her journey, and if it had claimed her life, you do start to think of those things as something that is embodied and human, something like cancer. And so I think that's one of the reasons why that last scene was so incredibly powerful, because he was like dying. He had, multiple stab wounds, but he, by God, was gonna kill that thing that had gotten his father and gonna kill that cancer and going to show it that it could not rule his life for any more time.
I think that kind of thing is so impactful for viewers to know when they're watching an actor.
Yeah.
A lot of actors don't take, just a script. They do work their personal grief or humor or whatever into it. And that's why they're cast, because they have these life experiences that lead them down paths that are kind of unexpected for characters. I think Rob Reiner got lucky there for sure, because it obviously showed that this actor who has one of the most iconic lines of all time said it with such fervor and such dedication that we hear it in our heads in his own voice. Like the power of that culturally. I think Mandy knows. He knows how important it is for people to relate to that. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I also think, as adults especially, we come across these moments in our lives where we're supposed to face this thing, or this thing is supposed to happen like this, or we're supposed to do this, or we're supposed to graduate, or we're supposed to have a baby, or we're supposed to get married. And then you get to those moments and it's not nearly as impactful or scary or fill in the blank or joyful or whatever it is that you've anticipated your entire existence.
Absolutely. Or publishing your first book. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And that was like, when will the sky turn purple? When will I feel different? Yeah. When will everything be awakened? When do I have that existential moment where I realize that I have actually accomplished this goal and that it feels like I've accomplished this goal? And I think when Count Ruger dropped his sword and ran,
that was it, huh?
That was that moment for him. And it's so true. Like all of adulthood, it's like, damn, is it really like 6 inches of snow and sleeting on my graduation day or my wedding day or whatever? And we have those moments where we're like, damn, is that really how this is going to go? Or someone says something and, burst your bubble. But I think that scene is so important because life isn't movie perfect. And this movie shows us all of these moments where it's not movie perfect. Like when Buttercup finally sees Wesley and he's in the bed and he's waiting for her and she's kissing him and he's like, actually, I can't move and this is really How many times does that happen to us as adults where it's like, hi, please don't touch me right now. I'm touched out. I don't want you. And instead, all the other movies that we've ever seen, of course, he's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
There are a few moments in this movie, though, where I found myself as an adult watching it going, could Inigo Montoya really land on the back of a horse right now after that terrible gut wound? Would he really?
That would hurt.
I'm sorry. I'm not even a man, but I get a real feeling whenever I see them land on the back of a horse. I'm like, oh.
Also, how did they find a horse big enough for Fezzik? How'd that happen?
They had this suspension.
That's funny. In that scene where they're riding out, right at the end where they're riding out of the castle, it is not Fezzik. It's some 5'8" guy.
That'd be a Barbie on top of a My Little Pony if they really fit it correctly.
Yeah.
So I will say, and I think in the book, Fezzik catches all of them. They jump kind of one at a time, and he catches all of them, which makes a little bit more sense because that's a long way to. It's a long way to land on a horse that way, man.
Yeah, the horse would not have been happy either. Hey, you know what? It's a fantasy film. It is. Mm-hmm. It's fantasy. Mm-hmm. So
one of the things I wondered watching this is are we actually supposed to like Wesley? Which I'd never really considered before. But like, he has some unpleasant scenes, right? The scene where he threatens to hit Buttercup.
Yeah.
The fact that he keeps up the facade like after he rescues her. The fact that he's a mass murderer never really like causes anybody any like moment of hesitation.
Well, and also
But he
doesn't
is.
show any of his personality when he's showing the farm boy, when he's the farm
No,
boy.
he has no personality
For
at
me,
all.
the one thing that I can say about him not revealing his identity to Buttercup 5 years after he's disappeared is this. He is not sure if he still loves her, because is she the same person that he left behind?
And did she
So that's,
betray
I think,
him?
his guard. Yeah. And does she, like, are those feelings still there, or is this just, you know, a passing youthful thing that he's just, I don't know, I'm gonna go find out, but I don't know. For me, that's why he did that, where he could have revealed himself, which is frustrating for the audience, obviously, but he didn't, because he was waiting.
But you
And
want
I
your
think he
audience to
revealed
be a little
himself
bit
for the right.
frustrated too. Like you
Yeah,
don't want to give your audience everything they want all the time. That's what keeps them
exactly.
going. So, I mean, I think a
But
lot of
you
people
feel
have that
like
question. They're like,
this.
why didn't he immediately rip off the mask and be like, my darling? Well, he thought that maybe she betrayed him, and he
Yeah.
wasn't really sure how he felt about the whole situation, which does beg the question, why did he come back at all? But, you know, it's good to make the audience get annoyed at the plot sometimes. You want them to, because it makes the payoff so much more satisfying.
We're also not talking about a perfect person, and I
Yeah.
think that's something that all characters, especially protagonists, need to be.
Yeah.
They need to have major flaws. I mean, if you think about like Tom Cruise in Legend, he was pretty perfect. That movie's not as famous as Princess Bride, and there's good reason for that, because you need a deep character who has a whole bunch of problems in order to really see them succeed at the end. Are there moments where I'm like, that's really cringy in 2025? Yeah, but not nearly as many as other 80s movies. So yeah, I think we are supposed to like Wesley because he has a beautiful face and a great head of hair, and he's really good at sword fighting.
My
And when he
11-year-old commented on his hair.
yeah,
He was like, that man has amazing hair.
he has amazing hair. Listen, he does. They casted him perfectly. Oh, also, I did something really nerdy. While I was watching this,
No.
I noticed for the first like 20 minutes, I'm like, has he blinked? Has he blinked? And so I counted, and until they get to like the scene where he's in the pain place, he blinks like 5 times.
Oh, now I'm feeling self-conscious about my own blinking.
No, he's just like this the whole time to the camera.
I suppose he is.
No, yeah, it's so weird, and I'm like, that's why I loved him so much as a child.
That
Because
you
that
gotta see those eyes like the sea after a storm, man.
yeah, I was like, what the heck? And as an adult, I'm watching this going, who the hell else noticed that Carrie did not blink? Or did Rob do that purposefully? He literally does not. And if you watch it again, you're going to be like, gosh dang it, Jillian, I wish you wouldn't have told me that, because now I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no eye movement. He's just a statue.
So that's a really, not the blinking. The blinking is fascinating, but one of the things you said before you got to the blinking, and then both of you were talking about like when you're building a character, like how you have to sort of balance qualities out, right? So like you sort of the good things with the bad things. And I hadn't really thought about that before, because I'm not I write, but I don't write characters. And I guess my question is like, is that difficult to do with a character like Wesley, who has so many like obvious competencies, right? Like he's so good at everything.
So I have a character in my my first series. It's called The Two Daggers, and it follows several characters, but one of the main ones, his name is Henri, and he is an extraordinarily handsome man, and he's very, very good at what he does. He's a Wesley, so he's beautiful. He is extremely talented sword fighter. And when I wrote the first draft of the book, you know, I just kind of found myself being too easy on him. And he was boring. He was a completely uninteresting character. So then I made him extremely, extremely unlikable on purpose. Very, very arrogant. You just like, he becomes the hot, horrible, you know, guy that you just love to hate. We don't know if he's a villain or if he's a good guy. And he does atrocious things, a lot like Wesley. And I did that because I wanted to bring him to the brink of you absolutely hating him and thinking this is a villain. And then he needed to be able to turn around and to learn a lesson about life. He had to learn through experience how to be a good person. And he goes through some horrible stuff. And one of the things that we oftentimes do as authors is we have to take a look at our character and we have to put obstacles in their way. We've got to put those blockers in front of them. And sometimes it hurts because sometimes we love our characters and we're just like, I'm so sorry I have to do this to you. There's, something horrible that I did to Henri in book 3. I won't say what it is, but it's awful. And it was hard. I was depressed about it for days. I can't believe I did this to him. How on earth is he ever going to recover? But that is what keeps people coming back to the story. They want to overcome with the character because when they've invested in a character, they have this belief in them. They want the best for this character. And you cannot possibly create that emotional bond if you don't put obstacles in the way that they have to overcome. And it's hard. It is hard sometimes. You really just don't want to hurt them. And sometimes they push back. I don't know, Jillian, if you have this problem, but my characters boss me around.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes they push back and they're like, you're not going to do that to me. So yeah, it's hard. It's tough.
It is hard. I think for me, I always see it from this perspective of whether you're writing an antagonist or a protagonist, they are the good guy in their own story, and then they're the bad guy in someone else's. So that goes for every single character that has been dynamic that you should think about.
And in life.
We're talking, Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader. That's a good guy and a bad guy. And there's still people when he's Darth Vader who are like, he's the hero of all. We're talking Voldemort and Harry Potter. Like all of those classic characters that you see that you can twist if you think about it from the other side. Mm-hmm. So you're being shown one lens. If you think about it from the other side, who's good, who's bad. If you flip it, then you can start to really see their flaws in a way that you're like, oh yeah, or you can see
and their motivation.
They might have a point in doing this. Yeah. So it's always like you have to write, and then when you are writing, you have to understand that if there is a protagonist antagonistic story, that both of those characters have to have redeeming qualities and bad qualities in order. You can't just hate someone who's good all the time. It's not gonna work. Like, you have to hate somebody who's good and bad. Like you have to have that black and white that melds into gray with every single character that you write. Otherwise, your readers, and they won't know this because this is a finessing thing that you do when you write, they won't know why they found that character boring or one-sided mm-hmm. or not multifaceted enough, or I just hated that person. The reason that they don't like them is because they're too one-sided. They're too good or they're too bad. So you do have to weave in those little moments where it's like, oh my gosh, was this person actually like okay in some ways? Like, it's hard to do that with like Voldemort and Tom Riddle and stuff. But when he was a child, you can see that he went through a lot as a kid, And so with Wesley, it's like, I understand that he has been through a lot in the past 5 years. He barely survived the Dread Pirate Roberts in order to become the Dread Pirate Roberts. And that kind of thing, like we always see the Dread Pirate Roberts from the other side as being this terrible guy, right? But the reality is that Dread Pirate Roberts allowed for him to stay alive, mm-hmm. And then he took his role and now he's got a great paying gig. So, everything is multifaceted. Are we supposed to like Wesley? Yeah, we are. Otherwise, we wouldn't like The Princess Bride. Are we supposed to question him, especially in 2025? Yeah, of course. Would we do that in the 80s? Maybe. But he also is very whiny and he complains a lot. But there's also that is multifaceted throughout this movie. Like there are parts of this movie where it's like that character made a really poor decision, but they're still hilarious. So it doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
I also think there's something to be said about when you don't have a clear villain in a movie. And in this one we do, but we don't, because the Dread Pirate mm-hmm. Roberts is supposed to be the big villain, and then all of a sudden he's flipped. And so that kind of proves my point of you have this mixture of good and bad.
It's interesting to me as a historian. And, one of the things as historians we try to do is nuance the past, right? Because people want sort of simple historical narratives with like good guys and bad guys. And part of a historian's job is to look back and be like, no, actually, like everybody's terrible and good sometimes. And I think the point you make about characters, Jillian, about how everybody's the hero in their own story is often very true of historical actors, right? They're most of the time think they're doing the right thing, even if what like their sort of parameters for that may be really sort of what we think of as off base. But so that's, writing as a historian, I don't necessarily have the I don't really have the option of saying like, well, I don't like the way he did this, so I'm going to rewrite that.
Yeah.
But I do have the options in how I sort of present the past and how we understand it to people. So it's interesting to me, this sort of overlap. And this is one of the reasons why I had wanted to talk to the two of y'all about this sort of using this movie as a framing, because this, especially in the book for The Princess Bride, begins with this like long introduction about that sort of sets the book up as an actual book, right? So like Goldman in his introduction talks about how his father is from Flora, and then reads him this book when he's a kid, and then he tries to buy the book for his son, but it turns out that his father had just abridged the thing, and it was actually like 8 inches thick and super boring. And so then Goldman is setting out to write a version of The Princess Bride, of S. Morgenstern Princess Bride, that everybody can enjoy. And of course, there's no S. Morgenstern, there's no Flora, and there's no book. The entire thing is a setup, but he's presenting it as he presents throughout the course of the book. He presents like the made up original book as sort of an allegorical history of a real place and real people. So it's a made up historical fiction, and which is just sort of fascinating to me that like he went through the steps of doing that and it's believable enough to the point that I know that people still go into bookstores today and like ask for The Princess Bride, and they're like, no, the Morgenstern one. I want the real one. I don't want Goldman's abridged one. I want the original. Like,
he
no,
wrote a
man.
dual timeline is what he did.
Yeah.
And even if you think about the movie is also a dual timeline, even though it's very short with the part that we get with Fred Savage, who one little snippet I read about him was that he was so into that video game that they really were annoying him when they were trying to interrupt him and say his lines. But you're right.
That video game is one of the few pieces in that movie that you're like, oh yeah, that's the 80s.
Yeah. That's the 80s. Yeah. But what you're saying basically is that the book that he wrote is complex and complicated, because being able to tell that story, a story about a book within a book, is not something that a lot of authors would ever try to take on, because it is complicated. It's hard enough to write historical fiction. But historical fiction, now that I say that, is a lot easier than inventing your own universe.
Oh, absolutely. It's so much
you have
easier.
Guidelines, you have years, you have
how the story ends.
No electricity. You know how it ends, and no spoilers, but everybody's dead, so you don't really have to offend anybody,
Yeah.
So it's also very, very much a compliment to the authors that do write books within books, and they do write historical fiction that's. And my husband's so cute. He's not a history person. He says, "So what year do you think Game of Thrones is set in?" And I was like, "What do you mean?"
like the third age?
He's like, "Well, yeah, but it's in the past." I'm like, no.
Nope.
No, that could be 2025 in Westeros. We don't know, because it's all made up. He did such a good job of taking that and making it feel like it's actually a real place and not giving you a year. And that's why I was like, it's interesting that you're asking two historical fiction authors to come into this, because I can't tell you what year The Princess Bride is set.
I was looking at, especially the costumes, trying to figure out, what year do we think this is? And it's interesting because there's no continuity. So like the dress, the pliés that Buttercup is wearing in the beginning when she's still a commoner working on a farm, that is very like early medieval. And then whatever style you want to call the wedding dress, it's got this like high Regency sort of waistline, and it's got a silhouette that's like a totally different time period. It's not like, earlier medieval. It's very baggy, very shapeless.
You know what I would call that?
What?
I would call that 80s does medieval.
There you go. Yeah.
Because the other thing you have to keep in mind is brides did not wear white until after Victoria.
Yeah.
So that's something too, is it's like we are not wearing white dresses to get married in the Middle Ages at all, because you would wear the best dress that you had, or you would wear your favorite color.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Or green.
So those types of things just didn't exist, or green, whatever. You probably had a green dress because it's easy to dye things green. But no, it's 80s does medieval. And I love that about this, because they didn't have to follow any rules. Mm-hmm. But the best part is that they had the set already made for them. They used real historical places. They filmed on scene. They didn't really have green screen stuff. I love that about this, because you can date it to about 1100s, 1200s with the castle, but the costumes, no, there's no rhyme or reason to
and also Gilder and Florin, those are the names of currencies from the from the Middle Ages too. So it's very interesting. Just like they do kind of pull in whatever they need to at the time, like those swords that they're using. My son was in fencing. I've spent a lot of time watching a lot of sword fights. So those are those like long, thin sort of rapier swords. Those are not medieval. Like this, they're not using the right swords at all. Their pants or their hose, those are mildly older, definitely. Like they're not wearing pants at least, but their boots. What the heck is going on with their boots? So it's a lot of fun.
That's the best part about writing fantasy.
Yeah.
Not that I would know, but the best part about writing fantasy is no one's going to come into the comment section and be like, that's historically inaccurate.
Oh my God.
No, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because all of it's historically inaccurate. It's not real.
Oh, I just quick comment on that about anachronism hunters, or really pedantic readers. I just had a review
rivet counters
recently. This dude went and just like slandered one of my books in the reviews, and I'm reading it, and he's like, "She did this wrong. She said that wrong." And I was looking at it, and I panicked, and I double checked. I was like, "No, he's wrong. Everything."
You mean a man on the internet was wrong about history?
You can't say that, Elizabeth. You can't tell them that they're
I
wrong.
was like, God,
no.
You just like complain about it publicly, but not directly to them.
Drag me through the mud, and you're not even right. Jeez.
That's why I write super obscure stuff. Nobody knows anything about rhinos in the 18th century.
That's true.
Except you. You're the
foremost.
I get that with eels too. So I was going to say though that it is fantasy, but it's a little bit like it's less in some ways like Game of Thrones and more like Gulliver's Travels in that Goldman and Reiner, for that matter, are Goldman specifically is like inserting a piece of fantasy world into medieval Europe.
I would just call that historical fantasy then, genre-wise, because it feels like it's set in the past. You do have some references to like actual ways that our planet works. It's not like high fantasy where he's
talking about Spain and Italy.
World.
They're Spain. They're Spaniards, man.
Vizzini is a Sicilian.
Yeah, everything is fine except for everything else.
So the question I had was, I was wondering when you thought it was, but also because I do maps and geography, I wondered where you thought it was.
I've always thought that it was in the English countryside. I don't know why.
Florin is was an Italian currency. It was a Florentine currency, so I always figured it might be in the north of Italy somewhere.
I always felt Italy too. The book actually sets it in Scandinavia.
Okay, well,
no.
Which I was like, huh.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do. I think I have that in my brain because I know where that castle is on the actual map.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in the Midland.
By the way, we need to look this up. Can we still go to the Princess Bride Castle? Someone in the comments tell us. Can we go? Can we walk around and see the
I would hope so.
There are original tapestries there. All the stuff that you see in the movie, the beds, the tapestries, the linens, all of that is in that castle museum. I'm
sure you can probably go there still. I know the scene where he kidnaps, or where Wesley has Buttercup, and he's, right before they go tumble down that ravine, that improbably like neck-breaking tumble that they do.
They would literally have died.
Yeah. That's a place you can still visit. It's beautiful.
What about the Cliffs of Despair? Are those a place we can visit?
The Cliffs of Insanity.
Of Insanity, that's right.
Insanity.
Yeah. The parts that are the real cliffs, I don't know where in England that was, but it's there are a lot of places that you
probably near the castle museum, so they didn't have to use their budget to travel.
Yeah, I don't think they had much of a budget, that's for sure.
No, it really doesn't look like it.
Actually, we didn't talk about the stunts at all. That tumble scene.
Oh my God.
I didn't see anything about that on the behind the scenes because I'm assuming those people are no longer with us.
Because their necks broke?
There's no way. Like, that was nuts.
Yeah.
First of all, it was a dude in a dress.
Yeah.
There's no way it wasn't.
I love the sound effects over the top. They're like, oh.
Did you try and do that as a child after watching this movie? Yes or no?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course. Please don't do that.
I've done it by accident. I've never tried to do it on purpose. It certainly happened, not because I wanted it to.
No, the stunts are really impressive, and there aren't a ton of them, but they're sort of used to good effect.
I wonder how they did the rope pulling.
Oh, okay. How did they do the rope pulling? They're so fast and smooth. Like, how did they do that? I was fucking...
Okay, so here's my prediction. They probably had one person, like the rat crawly guy, who was really good at this. And that's the person that they shot. Because I was watching the filming of that and I'm like, okay, we're splitting, like all the different scene cuts. But then I'm like, but how did Fezzik do that with his back?
Yeah, it's clearly,
I
it looks like
don't
it's
know.
him. He's got all these dolls hanging off of him. Like, you can
Maybe
tell
it
they're not
is.
real
Maybe
people.
it's like a miniature.
But he's just like so easily doing that. And then I was like, that's really a person on that cliff. Like that is
it
a
really
person
is.
on that cliff. It's not,
Yeah, it is.
it's not CGI. So what? And then Wesley's doing this weird thing with his feet.
With the scissors?
The
with
scissors.
His leg? Yeah.
Well, like, what are you doing, man? Like, so,
of all the behind the scenes stuff that I've looked up on this is something that I haven't seen and I need to know.
I need to know
Who
too.
did that?
I need to know too. I was watching that. And then I love it when they are doing the sword fight and then there's that scene where they do the little flip on the bar and Weston's just like, oh, I've gotta stop the whole fight.
I know you tried that as a kid. I actually was thinking about that. I'm like, as an adult, I would recover in 5 to 7 business days.
Yeah. That's about right.
There's no way I would make it. Okay,
I'm always slightly offended when I see like lists on the internet of the best sword fights in movies and that is not on there. Like,
it's great.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. If you've seen a whole bunch of fencing, these are 2 people who had never picked up a sword before. Yeah. Tell us how they did.
So they did pretty well. So first of all, they were practicing constantly. Whenever they were not in scene, those 2 were practicing that choreography. So apparently they got so good at it that Rob Reiner had to ask them to slow it down and to be a little bit worse because they were so well rehearsed. But honestly, like they have a really good stance. They've got really good form. So they're trained. They had an amazing trainer who came out of retirement to teach them. It's clearly very choreographed. Like when you're actually sword fighting, this is a beef I have with any movie that has sword fighting in it. Rarely do they show. You're not trying to hit someone else's sword in sword fighting. Yeah. You're trying to kill them. So, that's very much, this is a very choreographed fight where they're like,
okay, but wait. But these 2 wanted to show off how good they were at sword fighting at the same time. And I feel like this might have been like their moment.
It was totally.
And Montoya is like, but wait, I actually want to show you how good I am at this because this might be kind of fun. Yeah. Did you get that vibe?
100%. They're switching hands. Right. They're twirling around. They're doing flips. They're jumping. They're having witty, like Errol Flynn-esque like banter with each other.
And Inigo starts by saying like, I got to use my left hand because otherwise it's going to be over too fast. I want to take my time and like really like show off here.
My favorite lines, by the way, like, people always have their favorite. Mine is, you seem a decent fellow, I hate to kill you. You seem a decent fellow, I hate to die. That is, for me, that's the one where I'm just like, there's something. He didn't blink when he said it. I love it.
He did not blink.
I didn't blink. It would be weird if he blinked. You seem a decent fellow, I hate to die.
No,
that's not a place to blink.
No, he didn't blink at all. I don't think his eyeballs got moist one time. So.
Yeah, maybe he's not human.
Well, I think he's Carrie.
He's Carrie. He isn't human.
Oh, there you go. So one of the things that I had, this is a bit abrupt, but one of the things I had wanted to talk to you both about is this is sort of an interesting piece of historical fantasy, right? And you're both historical fiction writers. Is when you're thinking about writing a piece of historical fiction, how do you make a decision about like what sort of historical threads to pull on, where you're going to, like, how do you choose where and what to write about and when and where?
I can definitely speak to some of that too, because my missing threads were quite evident. I write about common people. Well, my second book has a king. We talked about him a little bit, but then we talked about how people are both good and bad. But my first book, I write about a common person and an animal. And so obviously the animal didn't leave any written record. She left behind a lot of art. But the common person who cared for her didn't leave behind anything. So a lot of historical fiction is based on things that you can easily find. That's just it. Like, if you're going to write true historical fiction where you don't want to have to fill in the gaps a ton and be like, it's really loosely based on this, you have to pick a time and a place where things weren't completely destroyed.
Or like Wolf Hall, Hilary Mantel is a good example of this.
Yeah. We see a lot of things that are in the recent past. 20th century stuff is really easy because there's digitized records and that kind of thing. Places, it depends on where you are in the world. My third book that isn't published yet, I am writing about ancient Babylon, and so many of Iraq's everything is destroyed. So you have to find something, if you want to be true to your source material, that actually has that source material. Otherwise, you're going to be floundering and you may not know what direction to go. Now, historical fantasy is a lot easier. You can write about whatever you want to write about. There are no rules. But for me and for Elizabeth too, we set our things, our books in real places with real events surrounding them. It's difficult sometimes when, like I said, I have a common person that I'm writing about, that there was no royal scribe keeping record of all of these things. And that is why so much historical fiction dedicates itself to the famous people.
Yeah.
Because the commoners like us, we didn't leave anything behind. Personally, if I owned a rhino in the 18th century, I would probably leave a journal every single day about what that animal was doing. But he didn't. So I had to fill in the gaps based on things that were left. The decision where and when to write is basically like, do I like this? Is it interesting? Do I have enough to go off of?
And I think that it's really worth mentioning. A lot of people have opinions about historical fiction and the people who write it, especially I think historians. And I think that
John
Wyatt. But the thing to remember is historical fiction authors, we're not historians in the same sense that you are. But we feel a great sense of responsibility when we are writing these books. There is a huge weight on us. You historians, you are finding out the absolute truth, and you are trying to come to that. I mean, as much as you can, right? Like there is no absolute.
That's
truth.
actually another question I had for y'all, but we'll get to that.
But like we have to really take care of these people that we're writing about, because in so many cases, historical fiction might be the first and possibly the only contact that a reader or an audience or a viewer, if it's a show, has with a historical person or place. And so our challenge is, how do we take these facts, this historical fact, and fill in those blanks in a responsible way so that we can bring this person to life, we can put narrative around it, we can make an audience understand how amazing this time period or place or person was, and how relevant it is. And I think that story of historical fiction in general is the thread that goes through all of it is humans are humans, right? It's about humans being humans 1,000 years ago and being humans now. And so we do have an incredible weight of responsibility on us. And there's also a real challenge with balancing that historical fact with the story. So sometimes a trap that we can fall into is getting so wrapped up in all those amazing details that we fall in love with the facts. And we blow up a chapter with too many facts, and the reader is just like, I don't know what's going on here. I'm bored.
Those get cut.
You gotta cut it out, and that hurts.
Yeah, you gotta cut it.
Yeah. So it's, as far as what we decide to research, we research way more than we use. We will maybe use a third of the information that we find. A lot of that is just us gathering the info so that we can have an atmosphere in our head, and so that we can create an atmosphere in the story through small details, like a cup that's carved out of wood versus a cup that's made out of pewter. Little tiny things.
Does your fork have?
Yes.
Like, it's just such stupid little things you go on those rabbit holes about, right?
Yes. And Jillian's talking about, it's hard to find things in Babylon, and God, I'm glad I'm not writing ancient history.
Yeah, it's hard.
But I'm writing, my next novel that's coming out after this one is set in the 19th century. And I will tell you, it feels so easy.
Yeah.
I'm just like, there's so many words. I can use all these words. They have modes of transportation that are not just animals. Like they've got trains. It's amazing. Like they have buttons.
I understand that, right? I'm a medieval historian by training, and so as a medievalist, I'm kind of responsible for like the history of a whole continent over 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have friends who are Americanists, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to spend my entire career working in this county's archives.
Yeah. And in one decade.
Yeah.
It's insane. Yeah. John Wyatt, that's so interesting, because as a medievalist, you have to have looked at The Princess Bride through this historian's lens, where it goes, because we can't turn that off. We can't turn off that, is this accurate? Do we see these things right? Did they do this right? Would they have said this right? And we also can't turn off the part of our brains that we live so far after all of these events, whether they're fantasy, historical fiction or not. We actually cannot tell you the truth. And when you can't tell somebody the truth, like I can't tell you what this person actually said, even if that's what the scribe recorded, he could have gotten a word wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We truly do not know. This person had a beautiful portrait painted of them. Is that what they actually looked like, or was the artist embellishing? We do not know. So when people ask me that question, they're like, so how do you know if it's true or not? I'm like, the reality is that no historian actually knows if it's true or not. Because we were
that's
not there.
no, and that's I don't know that historians necessarily like to admit that, but it's absolutely absolutely the case, right? That we make our best effort at sort of looking at all of the pieces of the past and trying to tell the story that makes sense, but it's always contextual, right?
Yep.
Any history is about the present, right? Because we are always viewing the past through the lens of wherever we are right now. So there's always that. And there's always the fact, especially like the further back you go, like the less stuff you have, right? As you're saying a minute ago, like the amount of material in the archives is minimal in some cases. I had a professor once who said doing medieval history is a bit like if you dropped your piggy bank under a street lamp, right? Like with one street lamp in a dark, like where are all of the different coins going? And I think that's fairly apt. And so you gather up the coins you can and you try to make the best. This is a terrible mixed metaphor. You try to make the best story you can out of all the coins you have. But it's always just the best you can do. And even, historians live with the expectation that somebody will come along later and look at the thing you did and say, no, you got that wrong because either like we've changed how we think about things or like we found something different. And that's one of the fascinating things. It's one of the fascinating things about medieval history is there's so like we know so little in some ways. It is entirely possible for somebody to come along, discover a thing that completely changes like the dynamics of how we think about large stretches of medieval history. It's happened a couple times. And I think Jillian, you mentioned that it's, lots of people don't leave records, right? And there's a great line in The Art of Not Being Governed where we was talking about that, the author, whose name I'm blanking on for some stupid reason. It'll come to me in a second when I don't need it anymore. But where he talks about the fact that like he says the job of a peasant is to stay out of the archive, right? Because when you show up in a historical archive, it is because you have had some brush with authority, right? You are being
taxed. That's your journalism rules. So it's something strange, something terrible, something basically something newsworthy happened, and that's why that common person is in the archives. That's
so their job is to stay out of it. Like you don't want to be taxed, you don't want to get arrested, you don't want to die. Like you just want to live your life and not be hassled by the man.
So I have a character in one of my first books, and the only reason Henri, again, the same character I told you about before, who was my Wesley, the only reason why I'm writing about him, he was a real person. The only reason why we know about him is because he made one stupid, catastrophic mistake that was so bad it changed the course of all history. He's mentioned one time in one archive.
Elizabeth, you have to tell us what he did.
I can't. It's kind of a spoiler. You have to read it. But
That's mean.
He did something really bad. It was an accident, but changed the whole course of history. And otherwise, you'd never ever know who he was. So
yeah, I have something not as catastrophic, I don't think, but I found one archive record of a farmer who was checking on his crops. And he's just out in his fields. He's got literally like a farmer's almanac, right? And those kinds of things are interesting for environmental historians, but I'm a public historian, so that's not really. I just like things that are impactful for us today. But in his farmer's almanac, one tiny little sentence, he says, "Today while I was checking my crops, I saw a rhinoceros." Then he moves on to the next day.
Just like any other day.
Just casually.
Like you do.
Like you do. And I'm like, oh, well, it's 1754. That has to be the rhino in my book because there were no other rhinos.
Yeah.
So it's also like he was a common person. And I think that's fascinating too when we historians, like the only reason that his farmer's almanac exists in the archives is because it talks about weather patterns, crops, and that kind of stuff is important for scientists even today to know what was this like 300 years ago because we learned from all of that. But for me, I'm looking at it from an entirely different context. I'm looking at it from, oh my God, my rhino is there by the roadside.
Yeah, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on like the role of eels in English cultural history from like 500 to
eels?
1700.
EELS?
Yes.
You're also an animal historian?
Yes. I am I am the world authority on eel history.
Okay, John Wyatt. So, but then what is the most culturally important eel? Because is it Flotsam and Jetsam from The Little Mermaid, or is it the eels in the scene in The Princess Bride? Answer now.
Man, this was a question I wanted for y'all, actually.
You gotta know. Tell us about the shrieking eels, John Wyatt.
The shrieking eels. So yeah, hold on. Let me get back to my turn. I'll come back to that. Right. So no, it's fine. It's fine. But I found that with eels. So that was my doctoral dissertation, and nobody had ever really thought to look at like the role of eels in English cultural history before. And like they're everywhere. Once you start paying attention to it, they're everywhere. But
did they eat them?
Yes, they did. In great numbers. But they're also, because they eat so many of them, they wind up like showing up in a ton of other cultural ways. They're in art and language and toponyms. Like there's more eels.
They're in the maps in my book.
I'm sure
Shakespeare than any other fish.
Plates, right? Like, did they have like decorative arts that had eels on them?
Mm-hmm.
Of course they did.
Yeah. And nobody had ever like pulled all these things together and looked at like what's going on with eels in the economy and in language and in books and in art. And once you do, like, it becomes like there's an interesting story that emerges out of it. At least I thought it was an interesting story. But it's like it's just little bits here and there, and like it's like your guy with the rhino. Like if he doesn't randomly mention it, you never know. And like trying to pull all of those pieces together.
And those are not like there's not an eel history that you can look up. Like this is the history of this church. No, but in the history of that church, you might find that they had eel pie on Easter one year or some random.
What you're likely to find is that there are a surprising number of people that paid rent to the church in eels or tithing to the church in eels to like pay for the monks to pay for somebody to get out of.
John Wyatt, have you ever had eel?
I have.
I don't like.
Do you own a eel?
I do not. I have several stuffed eels.
What are your names?
Sorry. The maps that John Wyatt drew for my book, I gave him permission to hide some eels. And so if you look at the maps in the Alewives books, there's marginalia around the edges, and there's some hidden eels. So eel breadcrumbs.
This is the nerdiest.
and also I've written eels into the story because of John Wyatt.
Oh, did you?
Look at this impact. Yes. Okay, well I eat eel sauce. Does that count?
Yeah, but they are critically endangered, though.
Yeah.
Oh, I just don't like
the
eat at my sushi place down the street, I would imagine. John Wyatt.
Yeah, they are. You want to know an interesting thing about those eels?
Yeah.
Oh,
let's hear it.
So there's a very good chance the eels you're eating in Wichita, right? You're in Wichita?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a very good chance that they were caught in Maine, shipped to New York City, flown to China, grown in a tank, flown from China to Japan, butchered, and then like shipped back to Wichita.
Oh my God, that's a high carbon footprint.
They have an amazingly high carbon footprint. Yeah. Jillian. So to answer your question, I have eaten eel. I've had actually several people who've given me like little tins of eel. And at that point those eels are already dead. And I'm not contributing.
Have been eaten in the past because they're just like they're easy to catch, right? Like so this was a peasant's food, right?
So without making this an entire podcast about eels, I will say so eels have been eaten sort of all over the world. They're a global food. They've eaten in pretty much every continent. In England, which is where I did my work, for most of English history, they are a food that everybody eats, kings all the way down to peasants. They pick up a lower class sensibility like from in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Okay, so then the shrieking eels.
Yes. Right. So what I wanted to ask you guys, whether do you think this is like the best movie about eels or the worst?
Man, I'm a really big Little Mermaid fan.
I mean, Flotsam and Jetsam.
Hard. But we're not talking moray, like they're not talking about moray eels.
No. And actually that's a good catch. So like when I tell people that I work with eels, they usually get a couple different questions. One of them has to do with like, oh, you mean electric eels? And those aren't eels at all. Those are knife fish. And the other is like, people either reference, because we have very few cultural touchstones about eels, but they either reference the shrieking eels in The Princess Bride, scary, or Flotsam and Jetsam in Little Mermaid. And the eels I work with are like freshwater eels.
Yeah.
So the Flotsam and Jetsam are moray eels.
So I have had one too many encounters with morays because my family is Hawaiian. So I do not like them. I don't like, I'm sorry, I'm not an eel person, but morays terrify me. And that's what I wanted to ask you about the shrieking eels. Because those, to me, when I was a little kid, the only thing I knew about eels was moray eels, were in the coral in in the water. And so like, I always thought the shrieking eels seemed very moray-ish to me because that was like the scary.
I think so.
Oh, yeah.
I think so too. I mean, they're clearly a marine eel, right? Because they're
Those jaws, those
unassuming.
teeth.
The jaws and the teeth. Now, morays have like a second set of jaws
I
that
know.
come out.
Nightmares.
So yeah, I think the shrieking eels they might be congers actually. So congers are also marine eels, and they're really big. They're the biggest eels on Earth.
To your knowledge, John Wyatt,
Oh, good
do
point.
any eels shriek?
Oh, do it? No. They sort of
Are you sure?
they make kind of some like little whistling noises.
Oh, really?
Sometimes, and they kind of click.
They click.
But yeah.
So you need to talk to Rob Reiner about this, or
Yeah. But I think the shrieking eels are great, and they're a great addition. So in the book, it's sharks. Like there's just sharks,
I wonder
and so
why they
the shrieking eels are like, it does elevate the profile of eels in the public imagination, but it also it we don't have a lot of like eels we don't have a lot of cultural touchstones for eels that are positive, which that makes me a little sad. Like, because the shrieking eels here don't come across as great.
No,
right?
No one really likes eels because a lot of people don't really like snakes and eels.
They're probably related to the Trimmer monsters, so there's that.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, no, that's very true. People like eels remind people of snakes, and nobody likes snakes. They're like slimy and gross. And
I don't know. I've watched a lot of river monsters, and every time that Jeremy Wade would catch an eel, I'd always be like, "Oh, he caught an eel!" Like, it would just always be interesting to me because you don't. For me, I'm in Kansas. We don't have, to my knowledge, wild eels here, but we have a lot of other like wildlife and fisheries and stuff like that. So for me,
you would have historically actually there were eels that went all the way up the Mississippi. So you would have and the tributaries, but not for a long time.
Yeah, it would probably be and maybe there are some by Kansas City, the Missouri River area, but for me, I'm like, if anybody ever would catch like an eel on a fishing pole, I would be like, what the heck, man? But I know it's just like common everywhere else, right? So I don't know. That's really fascinating, John Wyatt. But also from one animal historian to another, it's so difficult when you don't have a solid base of what does this actually mean for us, because there's no one documenting that back then that says, well, culturally, this person did this, this, and this, and this in the newspapers or in the archives or anything. Animals are solely their own beast when you are researching and writing about them. You're dealing with an animal that probably didn't live very long and was mostly used as food. I'm dealing with an animal that was basically an allegory for colonialism in the 18th century. So these are two different types of things that we're writing about, but it is very difficult as an animal historian to figure out what did this actual animal creature mean to the people and to the environment that it lived in. And those are things that I think definitely need more examination by historians as we continue to figure out how to save this planet.
I think so too. And one of the things about the eels that I study is they were so ubiquitous that nobody really thought to mention them. Yeah, right? It's like they're of course there's eels everywhere. Like why would we talk about that?
Yeah.
So I guess one of the sort of questions I had for y'all is, and you touched on this earlier, the both of you, is, as somebody who writes historical fiction, like, how are you, like, what's the role of historical fiction in getting people to think about history?
It's very easy. This is like Elizabeth said, it's a gateway, but it also can be very
it's a gateway
difficult.
drug.
That is, because if you read historical fiction that was written in the 1950s, or if you read like Treasure Island, which is technically historical fiction, those perspectives of the past have switched, changed, molded over time. We see a lot more historical fiction right now that deals with the atrocities of things that happened in the past rather than just set in the past. We're dealing with specific events and people a lot more frequently than we did when historical fiction really first started to be a thing. For me, I always love it when people say, I didn't know that this happened. That's what I like to write about. And I always have real people and real events in my books. I know other historical fiction people don't want to do that because it's difficult to get the stories right, but a lot of mine are so obscure it doesn't matter. But what does it mean to history? It also means that you have to fight against telling the true story, which is nonfiction, and telling the story of how it actually physically felt to be there in that time and place with those people around you. The feelings and emotions you get to tie into historical fiction. As historians, we're not supposed to do that kind of thing because it's assumptive. But there's just a lot of things for me that because I was telling obscure stories, I got to fill in the blanks in a way that actually made sense from a trained historian's perspective when I'm writing my fiction, which I can't tell you, John Wyatt, how good it feels to be like, I don't really know. I'm just going to make it up.
I see historical fiction authors as ambassadors. I think that we're ambassadors to history. Again, we might be the only point of contact that someone has with a historical event or a historical person, and we do take that responsibility very, very seriously. I think that we have this amazing opportunity to make history feel more real than it does in a textbook. I mean, I don't want to, imply, John Wyatt, you're a historian by trade.
No, really, like there's the reason I wanted to talk to you all.
Yeah, but really, like we can take the work that you guys do is foundational. We can take that foundational work and we can just put that narrative around it and make it go one step further so that it's accessible. Even something, you mentioned Game of Thrones earlier and how your husband was like, when does Game of Thrones take place? Well, okay, we don't really know, but he asked that question because it's something that seemed historical to him and he was curious about it and he was interested. That's a step in the right direction. Yeah. And so a lot of times people will talk about how they'll watch something or they'll read something and it puts them on a rabbit trail. And the next thing they know, they're on Google and they're looking up, wait a minute, what is this thing? When did this happen?
Maybe they bought John Wyatt's book about eels.
Yes. And so it's a gateway and we are the ambassadors who have to take care and make sure that we set people on the right path and that we don't mislead. And also a really big question in historical fiction now and it has been for a while is how do we keep our own bias and our own modern point of view? Like, how do we balance that with history? Because on the one hand, we do want to remember that people are people, and we still do some of the same things and think some of the same things that we did 500 years ago. On the other hand, we, tend to look at certain things, certain atrocities in a very, very different way now. And it can be complicated to write about that without disgusting and alienating your audience, but at the same time, and maybe wanting to make your point clear, but at the same time being true to what the climate was in that particular time period. And I think that's really an interesting thing about Jillian's book, because in the beginning of her book, it's with it's a dual timeline. So you've got a modern character who's horrified at seeing this taxidermied rhino. And she's got this really modern sense of disgust around how this rhino was killed. And then it goes back into the past where they have completely different way of looking at animals and different morality around animals and how you treat animals. And so we have to really be good stewards of that narrative and try not to, mislead and try not to misinterpret the past, but we can be the first step that people take towards loving history.
That's really interesting. I mean, that's an issue that historians deal with too, right? Sort of looking back at the past. And there's often a sort of, you see it a lot in, especially discourses in this country around the Civil War and slavery, right? Yeah. This question of like, what are people 100 years ago, 300 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Like, what are their cultural expectations for the world that they're living in, and how do they understand it? And how do we reconcile sort of trying to understand it and present it to a modern audience and sort of through our own lens? Like, where's the balance there? That's a question that historians have to deal with too. I do think, I think that historical fiction is a really fantastic role, as you said, in sort of being a gateway to people to the past and making the past more accessible in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of professional historians try to push back at the idea that they ought to be storytellers.
Yeah.
But they are. That's what we do, right? Yeah. Like, you research. It doesn't matter how well you research the past and how much you think about it and like how interesting your ideas are. If you can't tell the story that you found, then it's kind of useless.
Yeah. I think. Have you ever read The Wager by David Grann?
Ooh,
no.
It is nonfiction. It reads like a novel.
That reminds me of The Boys in the
shipwreck.
Boat.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Like you're not talking about textbook history where you're skimming the surface for a lot of modern historians who are really trying to get their work out there. You have this nonfiction narrative that does have to present itself in a way where people are going to want to read it, whether it's a column or a paper or whatever. It's not just here's my thesis statement and I'm going to prove it with facts. No, if you don't have a compelling narrative, you're never going to convince people that your thesis statement is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also never going to convince anybody to give you a job or hire you to write for them. And as historians, the word is literally in there.
Yeah.
You're telling a story. This is the stories of the past that make us do what we do today.
Yeah.
I dealt with that a lot in my second book, where I'm dealing with a king who has some characteristics that are very much like a current leader. And it was hard for me to separate myself from that, but I kept going back to the facts and the facts and the facts and the facts. And then I found his last deathbed words. And I thought my own bias showing through was actually my historical knowledge and all of the things that I've been trained how to look for, whether a person was good or bad, proving myself correct. I have found the evidence. His last words recorded on his deathbed were, "God forgive me, my life has been one sin."
Well, there you go. See, he knew it.
Self-aware, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't realize,
I don't think all leaders
exactly.
are self-aware.
My bias was correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes we're dealing with human nature and things that people knew were right and wrong. And those things are right and wrong today as well. When it comes to things like World War II, the Civil War, slavery, all of those terrible things, there is no reconciling. But we do have to, in my opinion, leave it in the past because we cannot change what happened. And that is the sad truth of anything history, political that has happened that has been damaging to cultures or peoples, is that there is nothing that we can do today except for learn from it. And that's it.
Yeah, I heard a really interesting thing. I think it was Dr. Elena Yanigo who said this. She's like a total hero of mine. And she's also from very close to where I live. And she was talking about, in one of her podcasts about, did people think slavery was wrong back in the Middle Ages? And a lot of people will say, oh, no, that was just the thought at the time. They didn't think it was wrong. And she had a really interesting way of putting this, which was if people back then didn't think it was wrong, if they didn't know it was wrong, then they wouldn't try to not be slaves themselves. Like when you get down to it, they didn't want to be slaves. So if they're enslaving other people, they know what they're doing is wrong. And I've really gotten into it with a lot of historians about this and other historical fiction authors who want to try to insist that there is like a difference, like something about humanity has changed from the past and that we were able to maltreat people in the past and just, go on with our day and not be affected by it. And that's not true at all. People were people back then. People understood that they causing pain to another person could just as easily come right back at them. They don't want that to happen to themselves. And so I think they did know right from wrong. And I think they did know that slavery was wrong and that murder was wrong. They just had a different set of circumstances that motivated them to do it. And a lot of time, sometimes it was survival. Sometimes it was economic. It was greed. And yeah, John Wyatt, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, I was going to say like that question, like, what did people in the past think about X, Y, or Z? It elides the fact that you are, in asking that question, almost always deciding who you are going, like whose viewpoint you are going to accept for that, right? Like, like I know pre-Civil War, South Carolina, I think, was more than 50% slave. Like, so like that's a state where like at least half the population was like, no, slavery's bad, man. But the people who want to ask that question, generally what they really want is they want to think about the plantation owners, right? Like, well, it's just the system they're living in. They're just like, they don't know any better. And I mean, I think it's a trap. And I've made this point with students before a lot. It's a trap for historians to try to present their work as unbiased and like to try to step away from the idea that we don't have a stake in what the answers are and that we're not coming at it from a particular position, and to present the past as if like there is only one past. There is just like a single timeline and this is how it goes. Students always want that. Students want the easy, like my high school history book told me history starts here and ends here. And so like, that's what it is.
And I can guarantee you your high school history book didn't have eels or rhinos.
That's true.
Or the one guy in Elizabeth's book who
No.
did that one terrible thing.
I think that I want to,
No.
like, circling back around to Jillian's point about villains and how, you know, every villain at some point thinks that they're doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. You flip it around and you look at their perspective, and maybe there is some sort of twisted logic in what they're doing. And I think that these two things really kind of connect. With history, people did atrocious things. They always had motivation. People were motivated to do the things that they did. That's something that we really, really have to always keep in our head when we're writing these books, is what was someone's motivation? Otherwise, our story doesn't make any sense at all. It's not believable. And so I think that it's really easy to oversimplify things and just look at history in terms of black and white. Especially, maybe not you, John Wyatt, because you were a historian by trade, but I think that a lot of the general public, they look at it in terms pretty black and white, especially when there are atrocities that happened. And I love how you tell your students that it is possible, it is natural for us to bring bias. That's a very honest way of looking at it. And that honesty, I think, maybe people don't really want to acknowledge that as much right now. But it's true. And it's okay to acknowledge that.
I think so. I think it's not just okay, but I think it's actually really helpful. And you know, your point about the villains needing motivation, we can see that in the film, right? Like Count Rugen, right? Like, he's a terrible, horrible person, but he's also writing an academic treatise on pain, right? Like he's thinking about posterity, and he wants, yeah. Like, remember, this is for posterity, so please be honest, right? Like, it's like he's a historian of sorts, right? Or sort of sowing the ground for later historians. So, you know, I think that sort of pulls us back to the film. And we've been talking here for a while, so you probably kind of pull things to a close. But is there anything else about we've sort of wandered away from the movie for a while. Is there anything else about the movie y'all wanted to touch on before we kind of wrapped up?
One thing that I was thinking about when I was watching it, the very beginning, Fred Savage is playing that video game, and grandfather comes in and wants to read him a book. Oh my God. And I was just so, as a parent of a 13-year-old son, I just related so hard to that, right? Like, this, trying to tear your teen son away from his video game right now these days, really, really hard. And I just kind of felt,
I have to bribe my 14-year-old, actually.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, my son is actually,
he gets $10 a book.
He does.
Oh,
He would work on money.
Yep.
At that age, I was like devouring books, John Wyatt.
I was too, and my younger son does. But my older one, like, man, if he will not read unless I'm like, all right, I will pay you.
My son,
it matters this much to me.
He was a reader. My kid could read a Rick Riordan book in a single day. This kid devoured books, and then something happened, and he's just not reading. And Surin, I know you're going to watch this. We can negotiate a price for the books.
Oh, have I just put you in a hard place? I'm sorry.
Suffer. But yeah, like, that's something that, you know, everyone can relate to now. It was even happening back in the 80s. You couldn't tear your kid away from that video game. Not with a book.
I love Fred Savage. I watched every episode of The Wonder Years with my family when I was growing up, and to see him feels like a homecoming. And I know that was one of his first roles. And when he was interviewed about it later on in life, he basically said, yeah, I feel like they just needed a generic kid, and there I was, and I had no real talent, and I just got sucked into that video game, and this old man's coming in to read to me, and I was like, whatever. He don't care.
The perfect.
It's not just an old man; it's Peter Falk.
I know. And then he ends up being one of the most iconic movies of all time, and I'm like, you weren't just a regular kid, Fred. Like, you were the kid in The Princess Bride. Does he even have a name?
No.
It's just a grandson, isn't it? And neither of them have a name.
No, grandfather and grandson.
It's Fred Savage.
I really enjoyed watching the credits last night because I'd forgotten like the names, like grandson and the magnificent or the impressive cleric, I think is the name for the archdeacon. Well, this has been a really lovely conversation, but we've been at it for an hour and a half. I should probably let you all go. But before we do, you want to sort of tell everybody where they can find you and where they can find your work, and how they can learn more about medieval Colmar and rhinos and porcelain?
Jillian, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm everywhere as at Jillian Forsberg. I'm no longer on X. I have migrated over to Threads and Instagram, where I'm most active. My website has my books. I have a wonderful publisher where you can buy direct from publishing to support small publishers, historythroughfiction.com. And you can also just catch me on random podcasts. Just search my name into your podcast and you'll find me talking about everything from wedding dresses to rhinos to writing. So yeah.
And I am on all the social medias, and I still am slightly active on X. I only go in there about once a week to check on it. But you can find me at Elizabeth R. Andersen, SEN. I get misspelled a lot. And I have recently started a YouTube channel. I post a lot of videos of my very adorable and very precocious Siberian Husky. So if you like, my feed is a lot of historical facts and ale, beer, which I'm going to go after this afternoon and have a celebratory pint with a friend because it's launch day for the Alewives. You can also find my books on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Waterstones, wherever you get books. And I have a website, elizabethandersen.com. And I'm pretty busy on social media. One other thing that I want to just plug, Jillian and I are both members of the Historical Novel Society, and the conference is coming up in June. So anyone who's watching this who is an aspiring historical novelist, it is an amazing organization, very supportive for historical fiction authors. This is how Jillian and I met each other. And so highly encourage any people who write any historical fiction genre, historical fantasy, historical romance, to check it out. Really great group of people, very supportive.
Fantastic. That's really good to know. I'm glad you shared that. I know there's probably at least a handful of history grad students out there being like, I gotta do something with this.
Yeah, literally.
So hopefully maybe they'll start writing, and that'd be great.
That would be awesome.
Well, thank you both so much for coming and talking. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I will look forward to, Elizabeth, I'll look forward to reading your book. I need to go get it. And Jillian, I really look forward to yours as well. This sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.